I was halfway through polishing my Harley when a 50-something woman in oversized sunglasses marched into my driveway with a bolt cutter like she was starring in some low-budget spy movie. Without a word, she clamped the jaws around the thick security chain, bit down, and the lock snapped with a metallic crack that made my stomach drop. I didn't even have time to say anything before she yanked the chain free, tossed it onto my lawn, and announced that motorcycles aren't allowed in this neighborhood. I told her that's funny, because the President of the United States seemed to think otherwise, seeing as this Harley was part of his escort convoy. Her face flickered between disbelief and that peculiar kind of HOA righteousness that says, even if the Pope was on this bike, she'd still find a regulation to write him up for. She pointed a manicured finger at me like she was declaring a duel. "You've been violating the HOA's motor vehicle policy for months. I'm the Vice President, and it's my duty to enforce the rules." The bolt cutter swung at her side like some badge of office. I reminded her, calmly, that the HOA president had personally approved my motorcycle because of my work. She scoffed, claiming I'd probably forged that approval. At that point, I wasn't sure if she thought I was an actual criminal, or just the most dangerous man to ever roll through a cul-de-sac. What she didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, the president would be coming through town, and my bike was the lead-out unit for his security perimeter. We'd already cleared the route with local law enforcement, state patrol, and yes, even the HOA. But Karen, as I would later learn her name was, had somehow missed every memo, email, and meeting about it. Or maybe she just ignored them because she liked the feeling of cutting through other people's property like she was disarming a bomb. Her next move was to snap photos, my bike from every angle, my license plate, even me standing there holding a rag. She said she was going to report me to the board, as if that was a threat capable of shaking the Secret Service. I told her she might want to pick a different date for her crusade, because tomorrow her little HOA parking rules would be under more federal scrutiny than she'd ever imagined. She rolled her eyes and muttered something about people thinking they're special. The thing about people like Karen is, they aren't dumb, they're strategic in their own weird way. She didn't just walk off after the chain-cutting stunt. She stayed. She leaned against my mailbox like she owned it, waiting for me to react, maybe to blow up so she could claim I'd threatened her. But I'd been in the game long enough to know you don't give them what they want. I went back to polishing chrome, letting her stew in her own self-importance. That's when she switched tactics. "You know," she said in a tone meant to sound casual, "my brother-in-law is a police sergeant. I could call him right now." I told her to go ahead, but that he might be a little busy tomorrow guarding the motorcade. She froze just long enough for me to know she'd registered the words, but she wasn't ready to admit she was out of her depth. By the time she finally left, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd decided to drop it. But that was wishful thinking. 2 hours later, I got a call from the HOA president, apologizing for some confusion, and letting me know they'd received multiple complaints about my motorcycle. Multiple. Which meant Karen had been busy rallying her troops, probably with a dramatic retelling of her heroic battle against the evil biker. The president assured me they'd handle it internally. Still, I had a feeling this wasn't over. I was right. The next morning, I woke up to find my Harley missing. At first, my brain went to theft, until I spotted the orange tow tag on the driveway. The HOA had impounded my bike. And who was standing on the sidewalk, sipping coffee and watching me read the tag? Karen. She smiled like she just won a war. She didn't know that by doing this, she just set up a chain of events that would drag the HOA into the kind of spotlight they'd never wanted. Because in less than 8 hours, the Secret Service would be knocking on their door, and Karen's smug little victory would become a very public, very federal problem. When I called the tow company, they told me the bike had been released to an authorized HOA representative, which meant Karen had physically gone down there and signed for it. The woman had effectively stolen government property. I hung up, half laughing, half wondering how to even begin explaining this to my contact in the Escort detail. I didn't have to wait long. The Secret Service arrived at my house in black SUVs, 3 agents stepping out, all wearing the exact same expression. Someone had just ruined their morning. I told them everything. The chain cutting. The towing. The smug coffee-drinking witness. One agent rubbed his temples. Another made a phone call. The third asked for Karen's address. Karen didn't see them coming. I know because from my porch, I could see her pacing in her driveway when the SUVs rolled up. She tried her HOA charm routine on the agents, gesturing toward her clipboard like she was explaining a lawn ordinance. They didn't bite. 10 minutes later, she was in the back of one of those SUVs, not under arrest, but very much invited for a conversation. The HOA president called me again, this time sounding like a man in a sinking ship. "This is bigger than I realized," he said. "We're getting calls from the city, the governor's office." I told him that's what happens when your vice president confiscates part of a presidential escort. He muttered something about damage control before hanging up. By noon, my Harley was back in my driveway, delivered by the tow company with an escort of 2 uniformed officers. Karen was nowhere in sight. I figured she'd gone to ground. But if I knew anything about her type, she wasn't done yet. This was just round 1. And when she came back, and I knew she would, it wouldn't be with bolt cutters. It would be with something bigger, dumber, and far more public. The morning after the motorcade rolled through town, I was just starting to think maybe Karen had learned her lesson. The president's visit had gone flawlessly. My Harley had led the convoy, gleaming like nothing had ever happened to it, and the Secret Service had kept a watchful eye on everything from my route to my parking space. Karen had been noticeably absent from the spectacle, though I later heard she'd been seen in her living room, peeking through the blinds like a raccoon afraid of daylight. But quiet from someone like her isn't peace, it's plotting. I knew better than to assume she'd moved on. People driven by power and control don't just stop, they adapt. And sure enough, the first hint of round 2 came the very next morning, when I found an official-looking envelope taped to my front door. HOA letterhead, my name in bold. Inside was a notice of violation, citing me for unauthorized public demonstration. According to Karen's interpretation of the bylaws, my participation in the motorcade counted as an unapproved parade that had disrupted the neighborhood's peaceful enjoyment. The fine was $500. I laughed out loud. Not just because it was absurd, but because she'd somehow found a way to turn a presidential escort into a noise complaint. I called the HOA president, who sounded even more tired than the last time I'd spoken to him. "I'm aware of the notice," he said, voice heavy. "Karen submitted it to the board last night with a motion to escalate." "Escalate to what?" I asked. "She wants to pursue legal action on behalf of the HOA. Something about setting a precedent against high-profile motorcyclists." I had to hold the phone away from my ear just to process that sentence. This woman had gone from cutting my chain to trying to litigate me into non-existence, all because my bike was shinier than her HOA-approved SUV. I decided not to play defense. People like Karen thrive when you react. So instead, I went to the one place I knew she couldn't resist, the HOA monthly meeting. It was that evening, in the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early, wearing my riding jacket, helmet in hand, looking like the dictionary definition of unauthorized parade. Karen was already there, seated at the long folding table with the other board members. She had a neat stack of papers in front of her, and that smug look that said she thought she was about to win something big. When she saw me, she stiffened but didn't say anything, probably saving her big performance for the official session. The meeting began with the usual monotony: landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, some debate about the color of the new mailboxes. I could see Karen fidgeting, itching to get to her moment. Finally, the president sighed and said, "Next item, motion filed by Vice President Reynolds regarding public disturbance." Karen straightened her posture and launched into what could only be described as a courtroom drama audition. She painted the motorcade as a reckless intrusion, claiming it had endangered residents, scared children, and even startled elderly pets. She held up a shaky cell phone video, Her own footage, clearly filmed through her blinds, of my bike rolling past, escorted by police cruisers. "This," she said, pointing at the screen, "is not the image we want for our community. This is chaos. And it cannot go unpunished." When the president asked for responses, I raised my hand. "First, I'd like to point out that every law enforcement agency involved in that motorcade had cleared the route in advance, including our HOA board. Second, if this is chaos, then I'm curious how she'd describe the Secret Service." A few chuckles broke out from the audience. Karen's mouth tightened. I didn't stop there. "Also, as for startled elderly pets, I'd like to note that my neighbor's 13-year-old cat was sunbathing on their porch during the entire event. Didn't even twitch an ear." That got a full laugh, and Karen's face went red. The board voted. The motion failed, 3-1. But if Karen was embarrassed, she didn't show it. She just leaned back in her chair, lips pressed into a smile that wasn't a smile. That's when I knew she already had her next move planned. 2 days later, I found out what it was. I came home from work to find 3 police cruisers parked in front of my house. An officer approached me, polite but firm, and asked if I was aware that my vehicle matched the description of one involved in an illegal street race the night before. It was such a wild accusation I actually laughed, until I realized they weren't joking. Someone had reported seeing a motorcycle, identical to mine, speeding down the highway at 2 in the morning. And not just anyone. Karen had given the statement herself. She'd even provided witnesses, 2 other HOA members I recognized as her loyal allies from the meeting. Fortunately, the officers were thorough. They asked where I'd been at that time, and I told them, home, asleep, with security camera footage to prove it. 10 minutes later, we were inside my living room, reviewing grainy but clear video of my Harley parked in the driveway all night. The lead officer nodded, clearly satisfied. "Looks like you've got nothing to worry about here, sir. Sorry to bother you." I told him no apology was necessary, but if they happened to be in the neighborhood tomorrow, they might want to swing by the HOA clubhouse. I had a feeling there'd be some fireworks worth seeing. Sure enough, the next day, I filed my own complaint against Karen. Not for harassment, though she was skating dangerously close to it, but for filing a false police report. The HOA president was forced to call an emergency board session, and for the first time, Karen didn't look confident when I walked in. The meeting was tense. I laid out the facts, the chain cutting, the towing, the bogus fine, the failed motion, and now the false report. Every time I spoke, Karen's pen tapped faster against her clipboard. By the time I finished, even some of her usual supporters were shifting uncomfortably. She tried to spin it, of course. Claimed she'd honestly believed she'd seen my bike racing. But the officers had made a note in their report about her being advised to verify future claims before making formal statements. That, more than anything, made her defense crumble. The board voted to formally censure her, essentially a public slap on the wrist. Not the knockout punch I wanted, but a crack in the armor. As I left the clubhouse, Karen called after me. "You think this is over?" she said, her voice low but sharp. I didn't turn around. "I think," I said, "you're about to find out what over really looks like." What she didn't realize was that I'd already set the next stage in motion, and this time, the stakes would make the presidential escort fiasco look like a warm-up lap. The next move had to be precise. People like Karen didn't implode on their own. They needed help finding the self-destruct button. Lucky for me, she'd been laying the groundwork for her own undoing for weeks. All I had to do was give her a little push. I started by making a call to a friend of mine in the city's special events office. I'd done him a favor a couple years back, loaned my Harley for a veterans parade when their lead vehicle broke down. I told him I was looking to host a small charity ride-through for the local children's hospital. Nothing loud, nothing flashy, just a few bikes, Santa hats, and a toy drop-off at the clubhouse. He loved the idea. Within 48 hours, I had all the permits, police escorts, and the local news station committed to covering it. And the cherry on top? The route went straight through the neighborhood, right past Karen's perfectly manicured lawn. I didn't publicize the event to the HOA until the last possible moment. Legally, I didn't have to, since I'd cleared everything with the city. But I made sure the flyer landed directly in Karen's mailbox. The paper wasn't even warm from the printer before my phone rang. "This is harassment," she hissed. "It's a charity event for sick kids, Karen," I said. "You might want to think carefully about the optics here." Her pause told me she understood exactly how bad it would look if she tried to shut it down. But that didn't mean she'd let it go. The day of the ride was crisp and clear, perfect riding weather. About 30 bikes rolled into the neighborhood, chrome glinting in the winter sun, saddlebags stuffed with wrapped toys. The residents came out in droves, kids waving, parents taking pictures. Even the HOA president showed up, smiling awkwardly for the news camera like he'd personally approved the whole thing. Karen stayed on her porch. Arms crossed, sunglasses on, jaw clenched. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. But I could see her phone in her hand, and I'd bet my last dollar she was filming, looking for something she could twist into a violation. It didn't take long for her to find, or invent, something. That evening, I got an email from the HOA board. Subject line: Urgent safety concerns. Karen had submitted a formal complaint claiming that one of the bikers revved his engine aggressively near a toddler, causing emotional distress. She also accused another rider of blocking access to her driveway. The police escort logs disproved both claims. They showed every stop, every engine idle, every route clearance. But Karen wasn't aiming to win in court. She was aiming to create enough noise to make people forget she'd been censured. What she didn't realize was that I'd already turned her noise into a spotlight. The news segment aired that night, full of smiling kids, grateful parents, and a quick interview with me explaining the ride's purpose. But the best part came at the very end, a wide shot of the neighborhood, with Karen's house front and center, and her standing there on the porch, scowling behind those giant sunglasses like she was allergic to joy. I didn't plan it, but it was perfect. People started sharing the clip online. The comments weren't kind. Within hours, the HOA's community Facebook page lit up with posts asking why the vice president had refused to participate in a charity event. Karen didn't respond. For once, she stayed quiet. That silence lasted less than a week. One evening, I came home to find a brand new sign posted at the entrance of the neighborhood. No motorcycles beyond this point without written approval from the HOA board. It looked official, but I knew it was nonsense. The HOA had no authority to ban a legal class of vehicle from public streets. Still, I could already see what she was doing, creating an illusion of power. Most people wouldn't question it. I called the HOA president immediately. "This sign, whose idea was it?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by a resigned sigh. "Karen had them printed. She told maintenance it was an emergency directive. You're aware it's unenforceable, right?" "Yes," he said. "And it's coming down tomorrow." But tomorrow was too late for Karen's purposes. By the time the sign came down, she'd already sent out a special notice to all residents, warning them about increased motorcycle activity and urging them to remain vigilant. She even slipped in a line about recent federal incidents, a not-so-subtle dig at the motorcade. This was no longer just petty harassment. She was trying to paint me as some sort of neighborhood threat. And that meant it was time to move from playing defense to setting a trap. I called a contact in the local police department, someone who'd been part of the Escort detail and knew the backstory. We set up a little operation. The next weekend, I rolled my Harley into the driveway, parked it just so, and left it unattended for exactly 10 minutes. That was all it took. From my front window, I watched Karen march down the sidewalk, phone in one hand, a folded violation notice in the other. She slapped it onto my gas tank like she was tagging a criminal's car in a crime drama. Then she circled the bike, taking photos from every angle. Finally, she crouched down, reached into her tote bag, and pulled out, God help her, a tire pressure gauge. That was the moment the unmarked cruiser rolled up. The officer stepped out, calm as could be. Ma'am, what exactly are you doing? Karen straightened, clearly flustered. I'm inspecting this motorcycle for safety violations. As the HOA vice president, I have the authority. You don't, the officer cut in. And approaching someone's private property like this is trespassing. Her mouth opened and closed, like she was flipping through mental flashcards for the right comeback. She didn't find one before the officer took her name and issued a written warning. When the cruiser pulled away, she turned and saw me standing on the porch. I gave her the smallest wave, the kind that says, "We both know you just stepped in it." Later that evening, the HOA president called again. She's furious, he said, threatening to sue the department for harassment. She's welcome to try, I replied. But if she does, she'll have to explain why she was inspecting my tires like she's running the DMV. That got a rare laugh out of him. But I wasn't laughing. Not really. Because I knew Karen wasn't beaten. She'd been embarrassed, yes, but humiliation is just fuel for people like her. The next move wouldn't be small. She'd go big, something public, something designed to either force me out of the neighborhood or break me completely. And sure enough, the first hint came the following Tuesday, when a glossy postcard showed up in every resident's mailbox. It had a photo of my Harley, taken during the motorcade, with the caption, "Is this the image we want for our community?" Below that, in smaller print, was an invitation to a special HOA town hall to discuss neighborhood safety concerns, scheduled for Saturday, at the clubhouse. Karen's signature was at the bottom. I looked at the card for a long moment, then set it down. If Karen wanted to make the town hall her stage, I'd be there in the front row, ready to pull the curtain down mid-performance. Saturday came with that faint electric buzz you feel before a storm, clear skies, but you know something's going to break. I rode my Harley to the clubhouse just to make sure the first thing Karen saw when she arrived was the thing she hated most gleaming in the sun. I parked right in front, polished chrome catching every bit of morning light, and leaned against the bike like I was guarding a piece of art. Inside, the folding chairs were already filling up. Residents milled about in small clusters, whispering. A few people nodded at me, a couple clapped me on the shoulder. The HOA president sat at the head table, looking like a man about to referee a boxing match without gloves. Karen wasn't there yet, which meant she'd be making an entrance. And oh, did she! 10 minutes later, the double doors swung open like she'd rehearsed it. She strode in wearing a bright red blazer, the kind you see on TV lawyers, carrying a stack of papers thick enough to stun an ox. Her sunglasses were perched on top of her head, and she had that fixed, brittle smile that only comes from knowing you're about to attack someone in public and thinking it'll make you look righteous. The president tapped the microphone. Let's get started. This is a special meeting requested by Vice President Reynolds regarding neighborhood safety concerns. Karen launched into her speech before he could finish. Friends, neighbors, I come to you not out of malice, but out of duty. She said it like she was addressing the United Nations. For too long, certain residents have engaged in activities that threaten our community's image and safety. I am here to lay out the facts so we can take decisive action. She hit her bullet points like a prosecutor building a case. The motorcade, reckless, the charity ride, unsanctioned, the so-called street racing incident, witnessed by multiple neighbors, and most recently, blatant acts of intimidation against HOA officials, meaning her. She even had a slideshow, complete with grainy zoom-ins of my Harley parked in my own driveway. Her big finale? A proposed amendment to the bylaws that would grant the HOA authority to approve or deny the presence of certain vehicles in the neighborhood, which was just a fancier way of saying she wanted the power to ban motorcycles entirely. When she finished, she set her papers down like a queen laying down a winning hand. The room was quiet, but not in the way she wanted. I could feel the skepticism. People weren't buying it. The president opened the floor for comments. I raised my hand, not in a hurry, just enough to make her watch me stand. I'd like to respond, I said, walking to the mic. First, I addressed the crowd. Most of you know me. You've seen me ride. You've seen me lead the president's motorcade, with full law enforcement coordination. You've seen me escort Santa for sick kids. Everything I've done has been legal, permitted, and in the interest of this community. And everything Karen just accused me of? False, exaggerated, or both. Then I turned to her. Karen, you claim this is about safety, but it's not. It's about control. You don't like motorcycles, so you want the power to erase them from your line of sight. But let's be clear, this neighborhood doesn't belong to you. It belongs to all of us. There was a low murmur of agreement. I pressed on. Also, if we're talking about safety, maybe we should discuss the fact that you've trespassed on my property, interfered with a federally sanctioned security detail, and filed a false police report. All documented, all on record. Her smile faltered for the first time. I wasn't done. And if anyone's curious what kind of publicity this amendment could bring us, I'd be happy to invite the same news crew who covered the toy ride to sit in on the next meeting. I'm sure they'd love to know why our vice president is spending her weekends trying to ban charity events. That landed. The room shifted, people sitting up straighter, a few exchanging glances. Karen's posture stiffened, but her eyes were darting, calculating. The president finally called for a vote on the amendment. Out of the 30 or so residents present, only 2 hands went up, Karen's and one of her loyal allies. The amendment failed spectacularly. But if I thought that would end it, I underestimated her. After the meeting, while people were filing out, she intercepted me near the door. Her voice was low, almost conversational. You've made this personal, she said. I shrugged. You made it personal the moment you cut my chain. She stepped closer. You think you've won something here, but you haven't. You can have your votes, your little speeches, your friends laughing at me. But I will find a way to make you regret this. I smiled, but inside I knew she meant it. 2 days later, I woke up to a note taped to my garage. Final warning, remove vehicle or face immediate action. No signature, no HOA letterhead. Just block letters printed on plain paper. I wasn't rattled, until that night, when I caught movement on my driveway camera. Someone had walked up to my Harley with a can of spray paint. They didn't get the chance to use it. The motion light kicked on and they bolted, but the footage was clear enough to recognize the figure. Karen's ally from the meeting. That was it. The gloves were off. I called the police, filed a report, and handed over the footage. They couldn't make an arrest without more evidence, but they could issue a trespass notice, which they did. And I made sure a copy went straight to the HOA president. The next morning, I found myself walking into the clubhouse unannounced. Karen was there alone, flipping through paperwork. She looked up, startled. Just thought you should know, I said. If anything happens to my bike, I have a copy of that security footage. And if I have to, I'll go public with everything, from the chain cutting to the motorcade to the spray paint attempt. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. I leaned in slightly. You want to keep this between us? Fine. But if you cross that line again, it won't just be the board you're answering to. It'll be the entire city. I left without waiting for a response. But as I walked out, I caught a glimpse of her face, not angry, not even smug. Just calculating. Which meant she was already planning the next move. And I was ready for it. Because I'd decided something. The next round wouldn't be defense. It would be a hit she couldn't recover from. Not a speech, not a vote, something so decisive that when it landed, she wouldn't just back off. She'd disappear from HOA politics entirely. I just needed her to make one more mistake. And from the way her eyes followed me out of that clubhouse, I knew I wouldn't have to wait long. It didn't take a week. 3 days later, Karen handed me the mistake I'd been waiting for, wrapped in arrogance and tied with a bow. It started with a knock on my door at 7 in the morning. Not a polite knock, a pounding, sharp and insistent, like the building inspector had just found a meth lab in my garage. When I opened it, there stood 2 uniformed city code enforcement officers, clipboards in hand. "Morning, sir. We've received a complaint about unpermitted construction on your property." I almost laughed. "Construction? You're welcome to look. My garage hasn't changed since I bought the house." They stepped inside, scanned the space, and unsurprisingly, found nothing but my Harley, some tools, and a half-finished coffee. But then one of them showed me the complaint form. Under description of violation, it read, "Resident has illegally modified garage to operate as a commercial motorcycle repair shop." The complainant's name? Karen Reynolds. That was it. The move from petty to fabricated was the push I needed. When they left, I called a friend who works in the local paper's investigative desk. She's one of those journalists who never met a scandal she didn't want to sink her teeth into, and I'd been feeding her little crumbs about the Karen saga for weeks. Off the record, just background. This time, I told her I was ready to go on the record. We spent the next 2 days building the file. Every violation Karen had committed, every complaint she'd filed, every lie she'd told the police. I even gave her the security footage of her ally trying to vandalize my bike. And the piece de resistance? The Secret Service report from the motorcade incident, noting Karen's interference and the retrieval of protected government property. That one, I had to get through a contact who owed me more than a favor. By Friday, the story was airtight. The headline would be irresistible. HOA Vice President accused of harassment, false reports, and interfering with presidential security detail. I didn't tell anyone in the neighborhood it was coming. I wanted the reaction to be raw. Saturday morning, my phone lit up before I'd even had coffee. Texts, voicemails, links to the article, neighbors, coworkers, even the HOA president. The story had gone live at 6 a.m., and by 8, it was all over the city's social feeds. The photo at the top was a still from the Charity Ride News segment, Karen on her porch, arms crossed, scowling like she'd just bitten into a lemon. The article was brutal, but factual. Every claim backed by documentation. It quoted the Secret Service report. It quoted police officers. It quoted the HOA president saying, "This behavior does not represent the values of our community." By noon, there was a knock at my door, not pounding this time, but cautious. The HOA president stood there, looking like he'd aged 5 years in a morning. "She's resigned," he said, no preamble. "Effective immediately. She sent the board an email saying she's stepping down for personal reasons." I raised an eyebrow. "No mention of the article?" His mouth twitched. "She called it media misrepresentation. But between you and me, she's already taken down her social media accounts. I don't think she's going to be showing her face around here for a while." For a moment, I felt almost anticlimactic. Months of skirmishes, ambushes, and counterstrikes, and it ended with a single email. But the feeling didn't last. Because when I stepped outside later that afternoon, the difference in the air was tangible. Neighbors waved from across the street. A couple stopped to tell me they'd read the article and couldn't believe what she'd been pulling. One guy I'd barely spoken to before slapped me on the back and said, "Glad someone finally stood up to her." The only sign of Karen that day was the for sale sign planted in her yard by evening. No open house, no, coming soon, just a plain, white post and a small metal panel with a realtor's phone number. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt relieved. But that relief didn't mean I'd forget. I kept every file, every screenshot, every report. Not because I planned to use them again, but because I'd learned something from this whole mess. People like Karen don't change. They move. And somewhere down the line, she'd end up in another neighborhood, another HOA, maybe cutting someone else's chain. A week later, life in the neighborhood was noticeably quieter. The HOA meetings were back to their usual soul-crushing monotony about pool filters and mailbox paint colors. My Harley stayed in the driveway, unmolested, chain intact. Then, one evening, I got a letter in the mail, not from Karen, but from the realtor handling her sale. Enclosed was a note from the outgoing homeowner, thanking the neighborhood for its many years of memories, and wishing us all the best. It was unsigned, but there was no mistaking the sharp, looping handwriting. I set it on the counter, made a fresh cup of coffee, and sat out on my porch. The street was quiet, the air still. My Harley gleamed under the porch light, like the whole saga had never happened. And maybe that was the real win, not the article, not the resignation, not even the for sale sign. The win was knowing she was gone, and that the next time she tried to pull something like this, someone else would be ready for her. Just as I was thinking that, my phone buzzed. It was my journalist friend, sending me a link to an online forum for HOA horror stories. There, under a fresh account with no profile picture, was a post titled, "Unhinged Motorcycle Owner Terrorizes Quiet Community." The story inside was creative, to say the least. I laughed. Loud enough to make the neighbors glance over. Because if Karen thought she could still get the last word, she'd forgotten one important thing. I always ride in the front. And I always know what's coming up ahead.